Hi, and welcome to Sarah and Mike's Best Picture Podcast. I'm Michael Cole, and this is episode number 9. This week we're going to be talking about the film Mutiny on the Bounty, which came out in 1935. The film starred Clark Gable, Charles Laughton, Francho Tone, and was directed by Frank Lloyd. This is the only film to receive 3 acting nominations in the leading acting category, and is a big reason why the Academy added a supporting actor category. According to IMDb, it's also the last film to win Best Picture, while winning no other Oscars. Alright, so let's begin. With me, as always, is my wife, Sarah.
Hello?
Just for the listeners, just so you know, we have rain in the background. I'm not sure you can hear that, but we're in the middle of a big rainstorm, so you may hear a little bit of ambiance. But that'll be fun.
Yeah. And maybe a little bit of thunder.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully no too much thunder, but... Alright, so Mutiny on the Bounty, what did you think?
I liked it. It was a little bit slow at the start of the movie, and it was also... I think I enjoyed once they got to the first island more.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also thought it was interesting that they still kind of used title cards at the very beginning of the film. Not like once it started, but like the opening.
Right.
Had a title card, and it did feel a little bit more old-fashioned, or like an older film than some of the more recent ones we'd seen. But it was a period piece taking place, I think, in 1774?
1787 or something.
Okay, yeah. So, maybe that was intentional.
No, I read up on that. The reason why it feels so much older is actually that they were shooting on location in, a lot of the ship scenes were outdoors. They were shooting in Catalina. And so a lot of those ship scenes they were trying to get actual storms, and they were shooting out on the ocean, whereas the last few movies that we've watched have been in very controlled set. Even if they weren't on set, they were in pretty controlled environments. This film really wasn't. And a couple of the shots, like, how there was a lot of shots that seemed like foggy and out of focus. Like,
yeah.
Apparently they sailed to Tahiti to shoot a lot of footage, and when they got back to LA, the footage was ruined, and so they had to go back. So they were like, this was, I don't know if this was pre-major air travel or whatever, but they sailed out there from California.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting. I think it was definitely... It was funny because I thought that the editing, in a lot of ways, seemed more advanced than everything else, but the cinematography and some of that stuff did seem dated compared to the other films we've been watching. But if you're not familiar with the story, it's about a British naval ship that goes to Tahiti in order to... It's a true story. One of the things is about this film is it's the first Best Picture winner to be not only about a true story, but like featuring the characters that are actually real characters. So like in Cavalcade, they're on the Titanic, but they weren't actual real people on the Titanic. Same thing with the World War I characters were all fictional characters in a real setting. This was the first time we saw a true story with true characters. So it's the story of the Bounty, which the movie calls the HMS Bounty, but apparently it wasn't called the HMS Bounty. They didn't use HMS until a few years later. But and basically Captain Bligh, played by Charles Laughton, is like a sadistic captain who he claims he wants discipline and order, but really he seems to be a sadist. Before they've even really left dock, they're flogging a dead man, like an actual dead person, like, and just to like make sure that everyone knows you get flogged regardless of whether you die before your punishment's carried out. And they're on their way to Tahiti to get bread trees. Was that what it was?
To bring
breadfruit
trees.
Yeah.
As like food for slaves.
Yeah, to the West Indies, to where the slave trade was going on. Yeah. And so in the course of this movie, they go to one of the things I was going to say is the editing seemed really interesting at the beginning when they were first taking off in the boat from is it Dartmouth, England? Portsmouth in England. Yeah, it's
also a New Hampshire town.
Yeah.
When you said Dartmouth, that's what made me think of.
They're all.
I know it's a New Hampshire town.
Yeah.
Obviously,
They're
New
all,
England.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why. But yeah, that's how I remembered it.
Yeah. So they're taking off from Portsmouth, and in that opening, when they're leaving Portsmouth, there is like very quick editing montage of the sails going up and the crew going out onto their different positions and the people scrubbing the deck and the people raising the sails and the people doing whatever other jobs, and it was like really quick editing, something that we haven't seen in any Best Picture yet. I don't think.
Yeah, I liked that. I once you said that, I was like, yeah, I didn't really think about it in the moment, but that was definitely true. Definitely a lot of like cutting back and forth to like help tell the story, and no, like they didn't have to use talk about what the next step was going to be,
right?
Because they would just cut to the next scene quickly, which I think was kind of an advancement in like this a style.
Yeah, I know that. I forget what year. There's this movie called Man with a Camera by, I want to say it's Sergei Eisenstein, and it's kind of known for being, it's almost an experiment in editing, and I think that it kind of created what we think of as like a montage edit, and I want to say it predates this. It's either the late 20s or the late 30s. I'm totally spacing on what year, but I want to say it was like, I'm pretty sure it was before this, and so you're seeing that, but it was, he was a Russian filmmaker, and and he was using quick cuts to give a feel. He, in that movie doesn't really have a story. It's literally just a man with a camera taking different shots, but the way it's edited is so interesting, and it gives you this vibe. It's almost like a music video in its pacing, and you can definitely see the influence there in the edits in that scene. And then there was later on in the movie a couple times when there was edits that were similar, where there was a bunch of rapid fire cuts. I thought one of the problems I had with the movie was audio. And I know it's like an old movie, and right now we still have a lot of audio issues with some of these old movies, but I had a hard time following some of the dialogue at the beginning, and it was, we didn't have anything distracting us. I think that was the movie. Do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, Clark Gable was pretty clear.
There wasn't really much by the way of music.
Right.
Which was fine. It obviously isn't necessary.
Yeah. Clark Gable and Franco, I don't know how you say that guy's name. Franco, whatever his name was. They are very clearly, they speak pretty clearly, but there's a lot of talking over each other. In parts, there was a lot of crewmen that would be, not nearly as articulate as the two of them. Even Charles Laughton, I thought he spoke a lot and he spoke quickly, and there are parts where he was very clear, but there were parts where he was very unclear in what he was in his diction. I just thought it was a little hard to follow at points because of that.
Yeah.
I thought of the 3 performances that were nominated, I thought Charles Laughton, even though you can't understand much of what he's saying, he does the job of making you hate that character.
Definitely. I didn't really expect, obviously, like, the movie starts out from the very beginning, like, they're bringing these trees to feed slaves, which, I thought was weird. Not weird, but just, I didn't really think about that. Because I just thought that they would have food where they were. But, it just seems like a long journey.
It could be that it's something that keeps well on boats. Because this is prior to at least the American slave trade. America, you weren't allowed to buy slaves from Africa after 1801, I think.
Okay.
So all of this predates that. So if they were in the slave trade, it could literally have been food that would keep well for the boats.
Right. True.
And I know that, like, they were bringing these plants, and the plants didn't seem to have a problem growing under, below deck. They just need a lot of water, but beyond that, there was no problem.
But, basically, not my issue, but I was just very surprised when they were, like, whipping, when the wind stopped and the boat stopped. They had 2 small rowboats that they filled with the crew members, and then they were, like, whipping them to keep rowing. Yeah. And I just, like, each
boat had its own little mini captain, and one captain was he was also one of the people who got kicked off during the mutiny, and the other one was, the guy who was was a man of the people, and he, the guy who got kicked off was whipping his people and being a jerk, and the guy who was a man of the people was very friendly, and encouraging, and trying to give them positive reinforcement. He offered to whistle for them while they worked, and I think that was, like, clearly done as, like, to show, because even Clark Gable's character a couple times says, I think the men will respond better if we don't over punish, if we don't if we don't flog all the time. And Charles Laughton's character Bligh is very much of the, like, no, we're going to just beat everyone into submission. And so I think the 2 rowboats were there. I think it was interesting that they showed us, because I'd never thought of that either. That, look, what do you do when there's no wind? But I think the 2 rowboats were there as a metaphor to show us the 2 camps of thought on discipline.
Yeah. It was so much more harsh than I thought it was going to be. Yeah. And I guess that was a good thing to show. Or maybe, like, true, like, more true to to what actually would have gone on. But yeah.
I thought that it was, some of it was pretty gruesome. I mean, not like what they were showing, because what they showed, a lot of the, like the mutiny itself, there was a lot of parts where, like, you see a guy fall from the what do they call the thing at the top of the spire or whatever?
Crow's nest.
The crow's nest. The guy falls from the crow's nest, and then you see he clearly, like, stumbles into frame, and that's supposed to be him falling from the sky. Yeah. And it was just like, that was a little bit goofy. I get it, because they didn't necessarily have stuntmen doing the same amount of work, and they were actually probably on a real boat. So it wasn't gruesome in that way. But then when you see, like, a limp body that's supposed to be a dead person getting flogged or whipped, those scenes are gruesome to me.
Yeah. I was also, I liked the part parts where they were like on the island in Tahiti.
Yeah.
It was just interesting, and
yeah.
Clark Gable's character was like really nice, and
I thought that
that was probably my favorite part of the movie.
Yeah. Well, a couple interesting pieces of trivia. First, the woman that played Clark Gable's love interest, who I believe he marries, they don't really show that specifically, but it's implied that his character marries her, Tahitian woman. She ended up marrying Marlon Brando in real life, and Marlon Brando played the Fletcher Christian character that Clark Gable plays in this movie. He played it in the 1962 version. We probably should have started with that, actually, when I mentioned that we were watching this movie. That there are two other versions that are maybe in this day and age equally as famous. There's the Marlon Brando version, which I think was pretty well known, and then there was a Mel Gibson, I think it was Anthony Hopkins and Mel Gibson version, which was pretty well known. I think, if you talk to someone of the right age, this is the most famous, but if you were to Google it, I'm not sure this is the one that comes up every time.
I also think that I'm also pretty sure that I watched, and maybe it was a different version, and that's why I keep thinking that we saw it, but I didn't like explicitly remember this version. I think we watched this like in history class in high school when we were learning about either the slave trade or like this isn't around the time frame of Christopher Columbus, but something to do with that part of history. I mean, when you're doing like a history class in school, I would guess that those 2 points in time are no farther than like a month apart, so it might have been somewhere in there. But I feel like I remember parts of this.
Yeah, I have seen this before. I don't know what it
really would have shown, like, for a history class.
Yeah.
Other than, like, life on the ship and, like, the British explorers and...
Yeah.
I don't know.
One thing that I thought was interesting, apparently the guy... This is based on a book that was written about these experiences. And I guess the guy who wrote the book wrote 3 books about the process. And I think this is based on the first 2 books, which is The Mutiny and The Trial. Because a lot of the mutineers are tried and they don't show them being hung, but they show them being sentenced to death. But the 3rd book was about... So Bligh is given... Well, during the mutiny, Bligh and... What would you say, about 20 guys? Or so? 20... Like they fill a lifeboat. I mean, it's more than a lifeboat because it has sails.
Yeah, I'd say like 15 to 20.
Yeah. They fill this boat and they're in, they're not far off Tahiti. And they give them like a compass and a little bit of supplies and basically tell them to go find land. And apparently... I don't know how far they went. They don't exactly say. Although something I read said that they were about 500 miles off the coast of Brazil. And if you look at Tahiti to Brazil, that's a huge gap to go in. I think my parents' boat is probably about as big as the boat that they're on, and there's 15 of them. It's kind of insane that they were able to do that, and they refused to go on to land at all because of cannibals, which I don't know if that was a urban legend kind of thing, or if there actually were cannibals, but they refused to go on land. So Bligh, the actual Bligh, did that in real life, and he went and got a new ship and came back and to Tahiti and captured the men who were still in Tahiti when they got there, and then later in his life, Bligh was made the governor of some section of Australia. I want to say New South Wales, something like that.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, there was like rum running that was going on, and he was sent there basically to clean up the rum running, and he was jailed and overthrown basically for being a tyrant. And so like he had like a history of this, and I thought that was interesting that like, you know, he survived multiple overthrowings. Like,
yeah.
Not to mention that, you know, seeing the way he was in the movie, you could believe it. Like, you could kind of go, "Oh yeah, this guy. I would overthrow this guy too. I would not steal. I would not deal with this." But
one thing I thought was funny was like in like a cartoon or like the original Peter Pan like animated like classic movie.
Yeah.
I think on like Captain Hook's pirate ship they had like wooden swords.
Yeah.
And after they overthrow is it Bly?
Yeah.
After they overthrow him, they're at like the people who stay on the boat are at the bow of the boat, and they have wooden swords.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just. I wonder like why.
Yeah.
Like why are they wooden swords? Like are they worried about like damaging the boat? Like I don't know. It was just really interesting.
Part of what they had
I want to know the history on that.
Part of what I saw them have that wasn't wooden swords was
They were the pegs from the steering wheel?
There were pegs that the ropes would tie onto, and they had, and depending on where you were going to tie them, they were pulling the pegs swords. Out. And they would use them as clubs, basically, to bludgeon each other with.
That must be like a common thing on like so-called pirate ships.
Yeah. Basically. Well, I don't remember Peter Pan that well, but wasn't Hook's number one or his first mate or whatever they call it, wasn't it his name Bly? Something like that?
Yes.
I mean, it's probably based on that, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now that you say that kind of sounds right.
One thing that I find, it's not the first time we've dealt with this. We dealt with this a little bit in, All Quiet on the Western Front, but we had Americans with no accent playing British people or playing another. You know, it's kind of like right now.
Oh, his name was Mr. Smee.
Mr. Smee. There was definitely Bly. I've heard Bly before in regards to some pirate lore, and it's definitely not this movie. But anyway, so what I was saying though was like nowadays when you watch a movie, if you watch like Clash of the Titans or anything that's supposed to be like ancient Greece or Gladiator or any of those things, it's everybody's British. Everyone in all historical context is British. You know what I'm saying? Like you watch an ancient Egypt movie, they're all British. You watch Gladiator or
that's true.
It's all British. In this movie, everybody is supposed to be British. Every non-Tahitian is supposed to be British or Irish or Scottish or like something of the British Isles. And there are a few of the secondary characters, but the main characters are all Americans, and they make no attempt at like accents. And I thought that was interesting that like this historical epic movie, and it's willy-nilly with the accents. It seems like it seemed interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
So, one of the things that I read, kind of a behind-the-scenes thing that was interesting, is the producers and the director really didn't want Clark Gable and Charles Laughton to get along very well on the set because their characters weren't going to get along. So, they hired the two of them knowing, because they didn't want these characters to get along very well. They knew that apparently Clark Gable was a notorious homophobe, and apparently Charles Laughton was as open of a gay man as you get back in the 30s. He was married to a woman for like fans' sake, like for them, like for gossip rags and stuff, but he was like pretty open in the Hollywood community about being gay. And the whole film, for the most part, the film was shot in off the coast of Catalina, out in California, and Catalina apparently has had at the time at least pretty active nightlife and stuff, and Charles Lawton would bring his boyfriend around with him, and it apparently drove Clark Gable pretty nuts, and they did that on purpose, knowing that it would do that, which was interesting. They were using those two things instead of just how hard is it to act like you hate somebody. So let's bring a homophobe and a homosexual person together.
Yeah.
It's a little interesting of a thing. Also, I don't know, it seems like, I guess maybe in Hollywood it would have been more common to have homophobia, but I feel like there's a decent amount of people who probably weren't even aware that was a real thing. It was just like a thing,
definitely
back then, because so I just thought it was interesting that they were playing that that card against each other. One last thing. I think we're almost done. But one last thing that I did want to mention was there was a lot of talk afterwards about, apparently people think Clark Gable was miscast. What did you think of that?
No, I liked him.
I liked him. I thought he did pretty well in it. I think I kind of see what they mean. I'd like to see one of the other versions and see how they play it in the other versions, but I guess I kind of get it. But the other two guys were perfect. Charles Lawton and Franco Tone. I feel like it's Franco and I'm saying it wrong. But, I don't know. I thought that was I thought that he did a pretty good job. I had seen last week with It Happened One Night and this movie. I'd seen both of these before, but I didn't remember either of them very well. All I remember of Clark Gable is, frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a damn. And so, that was my whole mental image of Clark Gable before the last 2 weeks, and I feel like I get it. When they talk about that it factor, I get it after watching these last two movies about him, or with him.
Right. Yeah, me too. I like him now.
Yeah. He one last thing that was interesting is, so I don't know if you remember last week I mentioned that he was lent to Columbia Pictures as a punishment for an affair with Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford, I don't know if the affair was on that husband or not. I didn't find that out, but she was married to Franco Tone, and so Clark Gable and him went into the movie hating each other, and they're supposed to be best friends in the movie. And in the process of making the movie, they became very good friends because they would go out after shooting and they would have a good time, and so they ended up becoming pretty good friends, which is interesting. That's a decent that's a better reason to not like each other.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that he cheated before on her previous husband or whatever, but I didn't look that up. All right, so I think that's it. This is a fairly short episode. I think we only did about 25 minutes, maybe. We're recording on newer software, and I'm not fully familiar with where the time meter is on it. So, anyway, so I'm not sure how long of an episode this is. Next week we'll be back. I'm trying to look up what the next week's episode is. I've been trying to look it up for a couple minutes while we've been talking. I think next week is The Life of Emile Zola.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, I'll have it 1 second.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Nope, the next week is The Great Ziegfeld, then The Life of Emile Zola. So, as always, please, if you are interested in Best Pictures, please watch ahead with us. We're usually recording the week that we, release an episode. We're not too far ahead. So, but, go look at your Best Picture list online and watch along with us if you want. You can email us at MikeDiamond82984@gmail.com if you have any comments or interesting trivia that you want us to talk about on any future episodes. One last thing I do want to mention before we fully sign off. I didn't, as I've done every other week, I didn't do it this week. Mutiny on the Bounty beat these films for Best Picture. It beat Alice Adams, Broadway Melody of 1936, Captain Blood, David Copperfield, The Informer, The Lives of a Bengal Lancer, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Les Miserables, Naughty Marietta, Ruggles of Red Gap, and Top Hat. So it beat those films. Anyway, back to signing off. If you have any interest in checking out any of our other stuff, chocolatediamondmedia.com. We have a short film up from last month. We are going to have a short film up hopefully next week, our second new short film. I write for michaelchristophercole.com. You can read blog posts. Sometimes I put up short stories, things like that. And also I write over at World's Best Media, which is best-media-world.com. We will see you next week and with The Great Ziegfeld. Thank you.